Superheroes have become a staple in modern media. So many shows and movies have been made following these crusaders, it's sometimes hard to keep track of. Of course, when these movies and shows are being produced at such a high volume, there are bound to be projects with diminishing quality. Some good ones include Infinity War, The Boys, etc. There are also really bad ones. Multiverse of Madness. In the long run, there are a lot of superheroes to make movies or shows about, one of which is the infamous Flash. Back in 2012, a show was created called Arrow. A year later, during the show's second season, they introduced a character named Barry Allen. He was in the show for 2 episodes, and at the very end of his second episode, he was struck by lightning. From there, they continued Barry's story in 2014 when they gave him a show of his own. The Flash has now been running for 8 consecutive years, and its finish line is in the horizon with its 9th and final season. I've watched the show since the day it started, so seeing as it's coming to an end so soon, I wanted to look back at all 8 seasons, just to see how well they hold up. The common consensus of fans is that seasons 1 to 3 are top tier, and afterwards, the writing fell apart. Let's see if that's really true, or if the show's writing was never good to begin with. Season 1 is really great, and I personally think it holds up to this day. I actually remember when the show first started, I watched the pilot and I never finished it. Then, a week later, my parents called me to watch the second episode, and just like that, I had found my favorite show. Season 1 is the origin season, telling the story of how Barry got his powers and came to be known as the Flash. As the season progresses, Barry gets faster and learns new abilities and continues to stop new metahumans that threaten Central City. Barry also attempts to catch the Man in Yellow, the Reverse Flash, and get justice for his father, who was wrongly accused of murder. That's the basic rundown, but let's get more in-depth about what happens and what makes this season so great. There are a lot of factors that go into what makes it so special. One of those factors is the characters. All of them bring something to the team, and they have their own charms and unique personalities, which benefit the team and the story in different ways. For example, Kaylin's medical knowledge means that she can help out when Barry gets hurt, or that she can develop serums that can temporarily negate a meta's powers, as well as help identify a biotoxin. Cisco was the tech guy, making the suit, running simulations for the supersonic punch, designing props and objects, and helping Thawne with the quantum splicer for Firestorm. Barry also has his own things to do. He has his job at the CCPD, which means he is in the loop about a lot of crimes, and therefore he was at the crime scenes to gather evidence. He also was there to help out at Star Labs, and came up with ideas about how to save people and stop the villains. Episode 5 is a standout for this because Barry comes up with 2 new things he can do with his speed to save people. First, he thinks of the idea to run up a building to catch a window washer who is about to fall. And second, he thinks of running on water to get far enough away from the city so a human bomb wouldn't do any real damage. Wells, or Thawne, is also a really good addition to the team. His dynamic with everyone works really well because of his sarcastic persona, and when he isn't playing hero, he is an amazing villain. Each character is really endearing, and they all have their moments. A lot of the endearment also comes from the friendships between the main characters. Episode 5 starts with everyone at a bar. Barry and Caitlin stake out at a bar and have fun in episode 12. Barry and Cisco meet up at a bar, Caitlin offers to go to Cisco's brother's birthday party to make it more bearable, etc. Through the hectic chaos of being a superhero, there are moments like these that show that the characters are actually friends, and it draws us back to the idea that just like regular people, they're human too. One of my favorite moments between the characters is when Cisco and Caitlin are discussing how many bugs Barry swallows while he's running, and Thawne says,
"I look forward to seeing you accept your Nobel."
These interactions are very fun though. There's something that's missing in later seasons. Of course, there are still moments that do come off as trying a bit too hard, but the general amount of comedy makes the show more relatable to the audience. All in all, the writing for the characters is really good in this season. However, that also extends to character drama. There are moments throughout where tension builds between characters, and it's always believable. Things like Barry being upset about not knowing that Cisco made the cold gun is good drama. Of course it's upsetting to know that someone you have been working with made a weapon to stop you, and even if Barry understood why Cisco would make the cold gun, it also makes sense that Barry would be upset that Cisco didn't tell him about it, considering that now it's an issue that a criminal has it. Throughout the season, Joe has a suspicion that Wells is hiding something, and is involved with the death of Barry's mother. Iris even gets in on the suspicion about Wells being a bad person. Every time this happens, it causes a bit of drama between the characters, usually Barry. There are multiple points where Barry chooses to defend Wells when presented with the character's suspicions. One of my favorite moments of this is when Iris asks about Wells, and Barry is visibly upset about the fact that her and Joe believe that Wells is a bad person. There is also a point where Joe shares his initial suspicion with Cisco, and Cisco's reaction is very similar, visibly upset. Near the end of the season, when Barry and Joe finally realize that Wells is the Reverse Flash, Barry first has no doubts that Cisco and Caitlin will be on their side. Joe gets it in Barry's head that they may slip up and tell Wells, or that they're actually working with him. This leads Barry to have doubts about his friendships. In the same episode, a criminal uses bees to kill people, and Cisco's fear of bees leads him to want to avoid the case and help with the Atom suit. Cisco's willingness to avoid the situation makes Barry even more suspicious that he and Caitlin may be working with Wells, but at the end of the episode, Cisco proves that he's trustworthy. Even then, when telling them, Caitlin almost does clue well in about their suspicions, but Barry stops her before she can screw up their plans. Another really good source of drama is Barry's feelings about Wells during and following episode 17. Knowing that Wells is a bad guy makes Barry kind of rash and distrusting, so when Wells tries to convince Barry that the villain of the week is tricking him, Barry doesn't listen and the villain gets exactly what he wants. Then, in episode 18, there's a moment where someone tells Barry that they're jealous of the fact that he gets to spend so much time with Wells, and the audio becomes distorted while the camera zooms in on Barry. It helps amplify the ability to see just how much it's affecting him. The story of the season itself was also really well done. The season follows Barry as he learns to control his powers and protect Central City as the Flash. The overarching story follows Harrison Wells. Starting off, he seems to be one of the good guys, paralyzed by the particle accelerator explosion, but by the end of episode 1, that clearly isn't the case. You learn that he isn't actually paralyzed, and that he has a newspaper from the future. April 25th, 2024. Flash vanishes, missing in crisis. What's important at that moment is that we now know that Wells is from the future. As the season progresses, we learn more and more about what Wells has been up to. He kills Simon Stagg, we see that he has surveillance in the CCPD, and that he was watching Barry before he got struck by lightning, preparing for the moment that it happened. Turns out, Harrison Wells is dead. The one we've been seeing is actually Eobard Thawne. After years of fighting, Thawne finally learned the true identity of the Flash, so he went back in time to kill him as a child. Barry followed him to the past, leading to a fight where Barry got his child self out of the house in time to save himself, but Thawne wasn't satisfied, so he decided to kill Barry's mother instead. This change in the timeline made it so that Barry never became the Flash, but due to this, Thawne never becomes the Reverse Flash, so he loses his speed, leaving him stranded in the past. Due to this, Thawne takes the identity of Harrison Wells and fast-tracks the plan for the particle accelerator, creating the Flash. This way, he can use Barry to create a wormhole through time, and he can get home. Solid plan and understandable motivation as well. Thawne is an interesting villain because his plan entirely relies on the safety of Barry. Usually, villains don't need the heroes to be alive for their plans, and the heroes are a hindrance, only getting in the way. Thawne's plan is for Barry to provide a means for his return home. If anything were to happen to Barry, Thawne's entire plan goes to waste, and his entire future is totally wrecked. It also provides a neat character dynamic between the two of them, as Thawne has all of this history with Barry. He hates Barry, but he needs Barry to be safe. Meanwhile, Barry idolizes Wells, because before becoming the Flash, Barry was a fanboy. So it was a dream come true to be able to meet and work with Wells. But then he finds out that Wells killed his mother. His world is turned upside down, and the man he once idolized becomes his greatest enemy. Now they both hate each other, but by the finale, they both need each other in order to get what they want. The entirety of this complex relationship is played beautifully by Tom Cavanaugh and Grant Gustin. Tom plays the cold, calculating villain so well, especially this season, and Grant plays Barry amazingly. The whole cast this season is really good. The acting is always on points, the jokes land, it's great. On the other hand, I do have some problems with this season though. First off is some of the dialogue. There are plenty of moments this season where people exposition dump what's happening, or what their plan is. For example, in episode 10, Barry wants to stop Captain Cold and Heatwave by making them cross streams and cancel each other's guns out. When trying this, Barry is struggling, so over the comms, Wells asks Barry,
You know what you have to do.
Yeah!
Barry responds,
Get them to cross their beams and cancel their guns out, I know!
We already know that this is the plan. Both Wells and Barry know that this is the plan. So why would Barry need to say this? Especially considering the fact that Cold and Heatwave could possibly hear him say that. I'm also kind of confused about the way Thawne hides his plan in episode 9. During that episode, the team creates a trap for the Reverse Flash, but Thawne tampers with it, creating a hologram of the Man in Yellow. This way, Thawne is able to be present as Harrison Wells, but the Man in Yellow is also present. This climaxes when the Reverse Flash breaks through the containment field and attacks Wells. I'm confused about how this would work. Thawne's explanation is that he created a speed mirage. He moved so fast that he created an after image of himself. But is the after image Wells or the Reverse Flash? It would obviously have to be Wells, considering that Thawne is there to attack the police until Barry shows up. But after Barry attacks the Reverse Flash, does nobody in the room check on Wells? He would have to be a speed mirage, which means that if anyone went up to talk to him or move him or anything, he wouldn't be able to go along with it, because he's not there. That means the entire police team that was present, Eddie and Joe, all didn't check on Wells until after Barry finished getting his ass kicked. That's convenient. Another writing error I noticed is in the finale, Thawne wants Barry to collide with a hydrogen proton to create a stable wormhole allowing both Barry and Thawne to enter the timeline. Barry will go back to the night his mother died and save her, and Thawne will return to his timeline. Arguably, this plan is stupid, and I will get to that, but Barry says something to Thawne that made me realize just how dumb Team Flash was being. Thawne explained that once the wormhole is created, Barry would have 1 minute and 52 seconds to save his mother, and return to the present before the wormhole becomes unstable and creates a singularity. Thawne says,
Almost 2 minutes. More than enough time to save Nora.
Barry responds saying,
But not enough time to stop you from going home?
but there is literally no reason that he would have to let Thawne go back to his time. He gave Barry the instructions to go back, but Barry has no actual obligation to let him go. Thawne is already beaten and locked in the pipeline. Just go back in time and leave Thawne imprisoned. Simple. Anyways, ignoring that simple fact, Thawne's endgame doesn't work if we follow the time travel rules given by the show this season. Each time that a character time travels this season, we see clear differences in the timeline. Thawne's first time travel incident resulted in the death of Barry's mother, and Thawne losing his speed. But even though the changes to the timeline means that Thawne never becomes the Reverse Flash, he still exists in the past. That's because he was the one who made the changes to the timeline. Same thing happens when Barry time travels at the end of episode 15. He ends up resetting that day and making changes to the timeline. Arguably, due to those changes, Barry shouldn't be there, as the timeline he came from never happened, but since he was the one who changed the timeline, he is still present to continue the new timeline. Seemingly, the rule is, if you change the timeline, you won't be erased, but you can still be affected by the changes. That being said, by the time Thawne enacts his final plan, the concurrent changes to the timeline would ensure that Barry wouldn't be able to get back to the future, and Thawne wouldn't exist. The thing is, Thawne's existence in this timeline is relying entirely on the fact that Barry's mother was killed that night, resulting in him losing his speed and becoming Wells. Allowing Barry to save his mother means that he wouldn't lose his speed, and he would be able to return to the future without a problem. That also means that Wells Thawne in the present timeline wouldn't exist. No matter how you look at it, if Barry does go through with saving his mother, Thawne doesn't become a member of the present timeline. That also means that he wouldn't be there to give Barry his speed, which means that Barry would lose his speed and be trapped in the past. With the established rules of time travel, letting Barry save his mom would mean that Thawne's plans get ruined. However, other than those few issues, Season 1 is still really solid, and it was really enjoyable when I rewatched it. Season 2 starts off 6 months following the end of the first season. At the start, Barry has decided to be a lone wolf and ditch the rest of the team, as he doesn't want to put their lives at risk following the singularity they created via their wormhole. The city is holding an event called Flash Day, where they plan on giving Barry the key to the city. Barry, however, doesn't actually plan on showing up. You get to see Barry interact with Joe at first, and you can see that Barry is clearly pushing everyone away and trying to avoid involvement at all costs. But after Iris talks to him, we get to see exactly what made him so distant. When stopping the singularity, Firestorm had to fly into the center of it and separate, causing a flood of energy, and it would close the singularity. But in doing so, Ronnie died. After that, everyone kind of split up, especially with Barry pushing everyone away. Barry does eventually allow them to actually be there for him, and they once again become Team Flash, so they start working together to discover the new plot of the season. It turns out, when they stopped the singularity, they created a gateway between worlds, connecting this universe to another, Earth 2 as they call it. This is their way of introducing new metas. It's also their way of introducing the new big bad. At the end of the first season, a helmet falls out of the wormhole before Barry returns to the present. That was Jay Garrick's helmet, and now, someone claiming to be Jay Garrick arrives at Star Labs to warn them about Zoom. Zoom is another speedster who is obsessed with being the fastest man alive. Before arriving on Earth 1, Jay was in a fight with Zoom. Zoom gets the best of him and allegedly steals his speed, before the skies split open, pulling Jay to Earth 1. Now, there are 52 breaches connecting the two worlds, and Zoom is using them to send metas to kill Barry.
52 breaches in Central City, and the biggest one just happens to be in our basement.
Zoom's goals throughout the season shift quite a bit. He's firstly presented as someone who wants to prove that he's the fastest man alive in either world. But as the season progresses, you learn that he just wants to steal Barry's speed. You learn that he actually wants it because he's dying and he needs a cure. But once he gets that cure, his goals shift again. First, he leaves Earth 1 and keeps Caitlin captive. Then, he takes her back to Earth 1 and decides to take over the city. Then, he brings an army of metas to Earth 1 and tries to take over the city again. And, in the end, he decides that he wants to have one final race with Barry to determine who the fastest man alive is, while also powering a machine that will blow up every Earth except for Earth 1. While the progression isn't really unnatural given the pace at which it happens, it can be jarring to see just how much his plan changes throughout the season. His overall plan is really just that he needs to save his own life, so he uses his Jay Garrick persona to befriend Team Flash so that Barry will get faster, in order to take his speed as a cure. This season, they bring in Teddy Sears. First, he joins the cast as Jay, but then he dies, and then it's revealed that he's actually Zoom. The contrast between the two characters is incredible, but Sears does a great job playing both characters, and honestly, he did so good that it left me wanting more after the season ended. I think that he was perfectly cast as a younger Jay Garrick, and when he was playing the hero, he was so convincing that I was shocked when they revealed him as Zoom. Earth 2 also provided a way to bring back Harrison Wells, and man, they brought him back better than ever. Harry, or Earth 2 Wells, is such a good character. He is the perfect addition to the team, and it was really interesting to see the dynamics as the rest of the team learned to work with someone who looks and sounds just like the man who lied to their faces and hurt them so badly. There was also an interesting history between Jay and Harry, which led to them arguing about a lot of things, but eventually they were able to work together. This season takes a lot of what was good in Season 1 and makes it even better. They have a bunch of scenes where Team Flash go to Jitters and hang out. One scene that is noteworthy is this scene in Episode 3 where the gang are all talking about Professor Stein's condition, and Cisco does an impression of him. It's a really fun scene. There was also an episode where the whole team just goes out to a club to relax after a bunch of work, just because they want to chill out and have fun. While they do hang out less compared to last season, they do still hang out, and it manages to balance heartfelt and fun moments with the serious tone of the overarching story. This season also introduces 2 other new characters that were great additions to the show. One of them was Patty Spivot, a detective working at the CCPD. She has a backstory with Weather Wizard, which was showcased really well, albeit through exposition, in episode 9. She also served as a new love interest for Barry in the first half of the season. Patty is a really fun character and actually ends up being a really badass character who stands up against multiple metas, even though she is always outmatched. However, she does become a damsel in distress too much, to be honest. The other addition is Wally West. He is the unknown son of Joe. He enters, and he very clearly has a chip on his shoulder. He's mad that Joe didn't know about him, and he doesn't really want to be around. But over the season, he learns to love his newfound family, and it's a good arc. He is a character that could have easily been annoying, but Keenan Lonsdale actually did a good job bringing this character to life. Grant Gustin again does amazingly with the acting this season. He kills it when it comes to emotional outbursts and heavy moments in general. This scene in episode 15 when he tells Joe and Iris about what happened on Earth 2 is amazing, and the scene in the following episode where he finds out that Jay is Zoom are just 2 examples. I think he brings his A game on the finale though, because throughout the entire episode his acting is on point, and he really sells the anger and despair that he is going through while trying to beat Zoom. Another really good aspect is that Barry actually does a lot of things on his own as well. Again, like season 1, the team all have their respective roles to play. Cisco actually gets a power this season and he becomes Vibe, so sometimes he ends up being the one to locate a bunch of the metas when they show up. Although, this power does set up a lot of issues about why the team can't just vibe all the metas and lock them up immediately. It's more understandable this season though, as he is just discovering the powers. Caitlin makes a speed-enhancing drug with Harry that becomes a big-ish part of the season's story. Harry needs to save his daughter, and he helps out a lot with tech and science things, and Barry is actually able to come up with his own ideas and be a brave hero. In episode 6, Barry actively seeks out Zoom to try and stop him, which does not go well, but it goes to show that Barry is taking initiative and wants to get ahead of the curve. In episode 15, Barry stops King Shark by electrocuting the water that he's swimming in, and in episode 23, Barry beats Zoom in a fight not once, but twice. Both times, Barry beats him with plans that he came up with on his own. Having a strong protagonist really boosts the show. Now, there's a lot of good that comes with this season, but there are also quite a few problems. A lot of these issues carry over directly from season 1. The dialogue is still awful when it comes to explaining things to the audience. In episode 18, Barry decides to give his speed to Zoom to save Wally. So, when the time comes for Barry to actually do it, they end up explaining what's happening in 3 different ways.
This thing is how I stole the Flash's speed the first time.
Okay, so what is it?
How I stole the Flash's speed.
Got it. So this device is going to take Barry's speed. Good to know. Not like I knew that from episode 12.
He's slowing down.
Really? He's slowing down? I didn't notice.
The speed force is leaving his body. He's becoming human again.
Why do you have to explain it so many times? We know that the device is going to take Barry's speed, so the audience doesn't need to be told that Barry is losing his speed. It shows that Barry was slowing down. It shows that the device was collecting Barry's speed. Hell, Wells said that the device was how he stole Barry's speed earlier in the season. The writing problems don't end here, however. As far as I can tell, there's actually an error with how they wrote the multiverse, and that comes in the form of the real Jay Garrick. In the same scene where Barry is going to lose his speed, Zoom explains when and how he thought of his plan. He says that the singularity showed him Earth 1, and once he saw Barry, he knew he had to come here and take Barry's speed. The issue comes with the fact that this isn't the first alternate universe Zoom has been to, and Barry isn't the first new speedster that he has met. He has a prisoner on Earth 2, the real Jay Garrick. He's the Flash of Earth 3. That means that Zoom either discovered Earth 1 via the singularity and then somehow got to another world and kidnapped its Flash, or he knew about the multiverse before the singularity, and he just had another speedster in his possession the entire time. But We know that Zoom had his Jay Garrick persona before the singularity happened, which means that he would have had to know about the multiverse before the singularity. Anyways, the problem really starts to show itself when you realize that Zoom got Wells to make a device that could steal Barry's speed. Why did he never think to use it on Jay? In episode 12, Zoom could have easily taken the device from Wells and given it to Jay on Earth 2. Once Jay started running, Zoom could have taken his speed and cured himself much faster than how he ended up doing it. It also would have spared him the fight with Barry that ended up getting him defeated. He wanted to get back to Earth 1 to get Barry's speed, but if he had stolen Jay's speed, then he wouldn't have had to go back, and he wouldn't have had to fight Barry, and he wouldn't have killed Barry's dad, and Barry wouldn't want to kill him as badly. It's simple cause and effect. Act like an idiot, get turned into a Speed Force slave like an idiot. Anyways, another writing issue that starts to become a real problem around this time is Barry's need to stop and talk to villains. He does this a lot, especially with Villains of the Week. I have less of a problem when it comes to the Villains of the Week, because he always ends up catching them by the end of the episode. I do, however, have a problem when he ends up letting the main villain of the season get away because he's being really stupid. The first instance of this is in episode 14. Killer Frost on Earth 2 traps Zoom in ice. Barry is there at the time. Zoom is defenseless as he's trapped in the ice. Knock his ass out. Take him back to Earth 1. Put him in the pipeline. But no, they just leave, and Zoom gets free and continues to cause problems. It happens again in episode 18. Barry gets the upper hand on Zoom and incapacitates him. They are in Star Labs. Barry can easily grab him and put him in the pipeline. But instead, Barry gets cocky and blabs to him, allowing him to power himself up and escape. Then, because of that, Barry ends up giving up his speed. Episode 18 is really the most problematic episode because the choice to give Zoom his speed is entirely idiotic, but I'll get back to that after this point. In episode 22, Zoom calls Barry over to the CCPD just to talk. Barry shows up and actually just talks to him. He stands there and has a conversation with him for 2 whole minutes. He literally says,
I'll do whatever it takes to stop you.
If so, why not blindside him? Team Flash seems to be really focused on honoring their deals to literal murderers. First, they freed Thawne when they didn't really have to let him time travel, and now they actually give Zoom Barry's speed. Zoom kidnapped Wally in order to get Barry to give up his speed, but once Wally was safely out of harm's way, Barry could have easily gone back to fighting Zoom. He had the Tachyon device. He had 100% knowledge that when in a fight, he was faster. But instead of blindsiding him, Barry actually gives up his speed. Why? To be honest, I am a bit forgiving of this, but only because it leads to the best episode of the season, episode 21. The introduction of the Speed Force is amazing, and I love it so much. It's really emotional to see the Speed Force help Barry come to terms with his mother's death, and it marks the first time that the Speed Force appears as Barry's mother, which was really touching. It's probably my favorite episode of the season. Anyways, the Tachyon device is, again, another instance of bad writing. They have an entire episode dedicated to Barry going back in time to get Thawne's help to get faster. The whole episode builds up to Barry getting the Tachyon device. The next episode shows that it makes Barry 4 times as fast as he normally goes. It makes Barry faster than Zoom. So, what does Barry do with that knowledge? Does he A, continuously use the device from that point onwards? B, accidentally break it beyond repair during a fight with Zoom? C, learn that it actually causes some type of harm to him or others, making it problematic to use? Or D, never use it again? I'll give you 30 seconds. Alright, time's up. If you chose A, congratulations, you're smarter than the actual characters. Barry uses the Tachyon device twice in the episode. Once at the beginning to test how fast it makes him, and once when he fights Zoom. After that, Barry never uses it again. I understand that in later seasons, Barry is powerful enough that he doesn't need it anymore. Except he could still use it to be even more powerful, and whenever a new speedster shows up. But at the moment, Barry is a novice speedster. he has found 3 other speedsters that have been faster than him, so there is no realistic reason that Barry would not use the tachyon device, especially because they proved at the start of the episode that it doesn't negatively affect anyone in any way. At the end of episode 22, Zoom kidnaps Barry's dad and kills him. Ignoring the fact that Barry just stands there and lets it happen, it could have been entirely avoided if Barry had just used the tachyon device. You know, the thing that guarantees that Zoom will stand no chance against Barry? There are a few more bad pieces of writing that I want to talk about. The first one is, Team Flash are all complete assholes. Barry just had his father killed in front of him. He is the only speedster on the team, and therefore is the only one who is realistically capable of stopping Zoom permanently. But what do? They trank him and lock him in the pipeline because he wants to kill Zoom. They end up planning to send Zoom back to Earth 2, leaving the breaches closed for good, and effectively trapping Zoom on Earth 2. Now, not only is this plan morally wrong, but there's a big flaw in their logic. 1. They would be leaving Zoom to terrorize an entire world. How many innocent people would end up suffering or dying because they decided to trap him on another Earth instead of letting Barry stop him? And 2. Zoom can open his own breaches. He did so in the episode before the finale. What would stop him from just opening his own breach to Earth 1 and continuing exactly what he was doing? Team Flash are complete and utter morons for this. They say that Barry is too angry to stop him, but Barry kicked his ass earlier in the episode. He is able to stop him. Anyways, after they try their plan, Joe ends up getting captured and taken to Earth 2. Wally finds out about this and frees Barry, and Barry rightfully has a moment where he is fully pissed with them. And they act like they were right? They say that they were trying to get Barry to take a breath and calm down. Right, they want him to calm down by tranking him, locking him up, and getting his surrogate father kidnapped. Barry is rightfully angry at them, and he's also rightfully angry at Zoom for everything that he's done throughout the season. Yet, the team acts like Barry is in the wrong. The worst part is that they decide to lock Barry up because he wants to kill Zoom. Barry had that chance at the start of the episode. If he actually was going to go through with it, he would have done it when he had the chance. And if the team is so worried about killing Zoom, why would they be okay with the Time Wraiths taking him? They would have no idea that the Wraiths wouldn't kill Zoom. They saw that the Time Wraith tried to kill Barry, and all he did was accidentally go to the wrong place while time traveling. And arguably, what ends up happening to Zoom is so much worse. The Speed Force badly decomposes his body and then turns him into a slave. If they didn't want Barry to kill him, why would they be okay with this? This episode marks the downward spiral of the characters. Anyways, last writing flaw. The end of the season ends up breaking their time travel rules. In Season 1, it was established that when you change the timeline, you can do essentially anything, and you won't get erased as long as you are the one who changed the timeline. But you will still be affected if those changes impact you. Like Thawne losing his speed when Barry doesn't become the Flash. At the end of Season 2, Barry decides to go back in time and save his mother. In doing so, he erases the timeline that he lived in originally, meaning that Thawne was never stuck in the past, meaning that Barry never became the Flash because of Thawne. This means that in the timeline Barry has now created, he would not have his speed. But when he changes the timeline, he keeps his speed. I get that they didn't want to repeat the storyline where Barry loses his speed and has to get it back, because they just did it. But arguably, they could have avoided this problem if they had written the season with a bit more thought. Like I said, if Zoom was smart, he would have taken Jake Garrick's speed. That would mean that there would be no reason to take Barry's speed, which means that they wouldn't need to use the storyline where Barry loses his speed. If Barry doesn't lose his speed to Zoom, then there would be no issue with them having a Flashpoint story where Barry starts with no speed. But alas, they wrote themselves into a corner, so they broke their established rules. They also set up a new time travel ability called a Time Remnant. This is explained in episode 11, when a version of the Reverse Flash appears in the present timeline, and then reintroduced again in episode 18. In episode 11, it's explained that Thawne is able to exist despite being erased because he hasn't reached that point of the timeline yet. He is a Thawne out of time who hasn't gotten to Season 1. That's why he is alive, and he was still erased from the timeline. That is a time remnant. Later, in episode 18, Zoom explains that he created a time remnant, and that's how he was able to kill his J persona without harming himself. This is all good, but that's not how the time remnant was explained. It would be better if time remnants were explained like this. Essentially, a time remnant would be a version of a speedster that exists throughout all possible instances of time, from when they became a speedster to when they die. Creating a time remnant should be a manipulation of something the Speed Force created to protect the timeline. It would explain why Thawne was alive in episode 11. The timeline needs a version of Thawne to exist in order for him to kill Barry's mom and get trapped in the past. It would also work towards explaining how Zoom was able to be in two places at once. He entered the timeline and pulled out another version of himself. This way, the time remnant logic remains the same throughout the season. In episode 18, essentially, it's explained that Zoom went back in time and took a copy of himself from a similar but alternate timeline. Or at least, that's what is commonly believed. But if it were explained like this, that would mean that you're just manipulating a safeguard from the Speed Force in order to create a clone, which works much better than what they actually explained, because they explained it in two different ways. I only have one more complaint for this season, but it is a minor one. At the end of episode 14, Zoom kills his time remnant and pulls him back to Earth 2, just before the last breach closes. In episode 15, we cut back to Earth 2 and see Zoom remove his mask to reveal that it's Jay under the mask. Or, well, technically it's Hunter Zolomon, but whatever. Anyways, in the next episode, Team Flash finds out that Jay is Zoom. I really like the scene in episode 16 where they figure it out, and I think that the reveal would work so much better if they had let us figure it out with the team, instead of having the stupid reveal in episode 15. Also, in episode 15, Zoom takes off his mask and says,
"This is a complication."
Even though killing Jay was part of his plan. It's not a complication. Anyways, with that, Season 2 is over. Overall, I think it was a solid season. For a really long time, it was my favorite, and when looking at it now, I do still see its merits, and I think that it is a good season despite its flaws. I do also think, however, that by the midpoint of the season, the cracks in the writing start to show a lot more, and it only gets worse from here. Season 3 kind of marks a transition point between what people say is good and what people say is bad about this show. This happens because the writing issues that plagued the first two seasons become a lot more obvious, and the formula that the show followed until this point becomes boring and predictable. Every season ended up following the same format. Barry fights some metas every week until one episode, usually episode 6, a new speedster shows up, kicks Barry's ass, and becomes the main villain of the season. Barry tries and fails to stop them like 3 to 5 times before he eventually does in the finale, and they live happily ever after, until the next villain shows up. This season's main villain is Savitar, and I have a decent amount to say about him. But first, we need to talk about the disappointment that the show called Flashpoint. Flashpoint was something that I was really looking forward to. I remember how shocked I was when Season 2 ended, and how every time they released a new look at Season 3, it hyped me up even more. There was the Comic-Con trailer, which was awesome. Then there was this one called Run Devil Run. The hype was real. And then the season started, and they undid Flashpoint in one episode. The thing is, Flashpoint became a plot device for the rest of the season, but they rushed to tell the story in a single episode, when it could have been something that was explored for a lot longer. At most, it could have been like 8 or 9 episodes. The thing is, I'm sure the reason that they didn't let Flashpoint be longer is because of the other shows that took place in the same universe. If the timeline is completely different, the other shows can't just randomly swap timelines without explanation. But The easiest way to fix that is just to say the rest of the shows take place after Barry resets the timeline, and we are just seeing what the timeline was like before Barry fixed it. Anyways, I would have much preferred to see a Flashpoint that was more like the comics. Of course, I don't want a complete recreation, but I think that there was a lot of potential for what it could have been. In the end, what ends up happening is we get to see one villain before the timeline is reset, and then the rest of the season is based around the Flashpoint metas getting their powers back. The issue here is that we never meet the Flashpoint metas until they become a problem in the main timeline. If Flashpoint were 8 or 9 episodes, it would be so easy to introduce the metas before going back to the normal timeline. Episode 1 can remain mostly the same. Barry beats the rival, Wally gets injured, yada yada. I would just make it so that the rival doesn't die. Episode 2 can have Barry step in as the main Flash of the timeline because Wally was injured. This way, Barry can see the new metas, and we get introduced to them in the timeline they were originally from. Magenta, Clive Yorkin, the rival. Hell, introduce some new metas, because in the real timeline, those 3 are the only Flashpoint metas the team have to fight against. There's no wait when the only time we get to see Flashpoint is the first episode. When Flashpoint is going to affect the main plot of the season, it's important that you actually get to see what it was and feel connected before it changes everything. Anyways, Flashpoint was a giant waste of potential. Following Flashpoint, we're thrown into the new timeline. It's very similar to the original one, however, there are slight differences. Cisco's brother's dead, Caitlin has cold powers, there's a new CSI at CCPD, Iris and Joe aren't talking to each other, and Diggle has a son instead of a daughter. But that last point doesn't affect the main cast of the show, so it doesn't really matter. Anyways, most of the tension is resolved in one episode, and we get back to our normal Team Flash antics. The rival returns and is promptly killed in the same episode, but we get introduced to our first minor but recurring villain, Dr. Alchemy. He is the one who is giving the Flashpoint metas their powers back. He has something called the Philosopher's Stone, and he uses it to give the metas their powers. Anyways, he does this to 4 people in total. First is the rival, second is Frankie Kane, or Magenta, third is Clive Yorkin, who I don't think has a villain name, and the last one is Wally. Yes, this season introduces a total of 4 new speedsters. One is Wally, one is the rival, one is Savitar, and the other is Jessie. Jessie is Harry's daughter. She didn't do anything last season, so I didn't mention her. Anyways, Barry starts this season by training her for a little bit. After that, she leaves and the show introduces a new version of Wells, H.R. Wells. He's not a scientist, but he comes up with ideas. He was a really fun character. I really liked him. Anyways, after that, Wally gets his powers and Barry starts to train him. But, in the same episode, Barry learns about Savitar, the so-called God of Speed. The suit design is awesome, I'll give them that, but Savitar is really lacking as a meaningful character or villain. I'll get back to that later. Caitlin also becomes a mini-villain this season, as her cold powers created a split personality, and that personality is evil. Although the logic behind it is a bit weird, I will also get back to that. Anyways, I want to talk about the main plot of the season, and that is Iris's death. Barry accidentally travels to the future, and in doing so, he sees Savitar kill Iris. After this moment, Barry dedicates the rest of the season to making sure that that future doesn't happen. I will say, it's an interesting plot, but I feel like it would have been better if it were a doomsday plot. Savitar does not stop blabbing about being a god, so why not have a God's reign sort of moment? Destroy the city, do something big. Instead of killing one person, why not kill all of Team Flash? Nuke the city, give it more urgency instead of needing to save one life. I'm a bit of a hypocrite with this point because in general I think there should be more stories where the stakes are centered around saving lives or civilians, but I think here, focusing the entire plot on saving one person is not a good choice. Especially because it's all about saving the life of a main character. It's so obvious that they aren't actually going to kill Iris off, and that makes it so boring to rewatch. Think of it like the Umbrella Academy. That show is about preventing a doomsday. The entire world is at stake, but they still have time for familial interactions, and to let all the clues unravel and play out in such a natural way. I've seen criticisms for this season that say the Iris plot makes it feel like she's a damsel in distress all season. The Umbrella Academy has the same plot. Five wants to save the world, everyone dies, but nobody feels like they're just waiting to be saved. Anyways, let's get to the villains. Killer Frost. The logic behind her powers are kind of iffy. At first, Caitlin could use the powers without actually being taken over by Killer Frost. We see her do this in episode 2, 4, and 7. In episode 7, she does become Killer Frost in a way, but her goal is ultimately to get rid of her powers. Eventually, the full Killer Frost personality takes over and she becomes a villain. But when did Killer Frost become her own personality? If Killer Frost was the main personality that took over when using her powers, why would she let Caitlin try to get rid of said powers? Anyways, the logic with the powers themselves also changes. At first, Caitlin is able to use her powers without changing personalities. Of course, it means that Frost is more likely to appear, but Caitlin can use the powers. But then, by next season, she can't use her powers unless Frost takes over. Why did it change? How did it change? Whatever. Let's talk about Savitar. He's an interesting case because the writing cannot justify his existence. In episode 21, Savitar has a chat with Barry about how he became Savitar. He is a time remnant of Barry, one created to fight against Savitar. But if Savitar is Barry, how can he exist before Barry creates him? His existence is a paradox, a time loop. Savitar needs to exist in order to kill Iris, and once he does, Barry creates a bunch of time remnants to stop him. Savitar kills them all except for one, which later goes on to become Savitar. But in that case, how does Savitar exist in the first place? It is so confusing. Savitar's origin is also character assassination for the entirety of Team Flash. Apparently, in the future, when Barry made the time remnants, Team Flash all shunned it because he wasn't the real Barry. All of Team Flash, Barry's friends, family, and Barry himself all abandon a version of himself. Why would they do that? Team Flash even care about random people that they just meet. In Season 1, Episode 5, Barry and the team meet Bette Sanssouci, and Barry immediately wants to help her and bring her onto the team. It's so out of character for them to abandon someone, especially a clone of Barry. In Episode 19, Barry goes to the future to learn who Savitar is, and Cisco tells him that he wants things to go back to the way they were. He wants Barry to be the Flash again. Why didn't he try to do that with a time remnant? Character assassination. Clear as day. Also, Savitar's plan is very convoluted. In order to explain this, I have to further explain his motivation. Essentially, in the future, after killing all but one time remnant, Savitar is trapped inside the Speed Force. After this, his existence in the real world depended on the Philosopher's Stone. Now, due to the fact that he was trapped, he needed a speedster to take his place in the Speed Force. Earlier in the season, Barry and Jay throw the Philosopher's Stone into the Speed Force, but Caitlin keeps a piece of it to see if she can remove her powers. Savitar then begins to manipulate Wally to throw the remaining piece into the Speed Force. Once Wally does this, he's pulled into the Speed Force and Savitar is freed. He then explains what happened when Barry asks.
What just happened to him?
He says,
Like the Greek myth of Atlas, who could not put down the sky until someone took his place, Wally has taken up my place in the Speed Force.
He says that Flashpoint gave him the idea to turn Wally into Kid Flash and manipulate him into taking his place. But the fact is, he never needed Wally to become Kid Flash. All it did was backfire on him in the finale. Anyways, Savitar needed a speedster to replace him in the Speed Force. The first Flashpoint meta that Alchemy made was the rival, a speedster. Alchemy had the Philosopher's Stone, and the rival had a connection to the Speed Force. Why didn't Savitar just make Claris throw the stone into the Speed Force? Why not make Claris take his place? Then Wally wouldn't have to become a hero, and Savitar would have had to deal with one less speedster. Speaking of which, Savitar was so overpowered when he was in the Speed Force. He could move anywhere in an instant, and he could interact with speedsters who couldn't even react in time. Look at this shit. Why would he want to escape the Speed Force so soon? The funny thing is, if he had just waited a little while longer, he could have done some serious damage. If he had manipulated Wally closer to, or even just before Iris was supposed to die, then he would have had such an advantage. Everyone would be blindsided by Wally getting pulled into the Speed Force, and then they would have no time to prepare. Savitar's Speed Force prison also has weird logic. Before Savitar, there wouldn't be a Speed Force prison. It's said that Barry created the prison to trap Savitar, but when we get to the end of the season, apparently the prison is essential to balance the Speed Force, and once they free Jay in the finale, the Speed Force begins to wreck Central City. When did it become such an essential part of the Speed Force? Anyways, this season ends with one of the worst finales ever. Episode 22 was dedicated to getting a power source to power a weapon that would trap Savitar in the Speed Force. While Barry is doing that, Joe and Wally take Iris to Earth 2 without telling Barry, since if he knows, Savitar would know. HR then proceeds to tell Savitar where Iris is because he thought it was Barry. This is stupid as hell though, because even if it wasn't Savitar, why would you tell Barry? Barry's memories are connected to Savitar's, so why would you tell him? The drama is entirely manufactured. Anyways, Barry decides that it's fine. He's gonna go trap Savitar. Everything will be fine. He shows up to the moment where Iris dies, and he tries to trap Savitar, but it doesn't work. Then, when faced with the threat of Iris's death, Barry does the exact same thing he does in the future vision and fails to save her. I've always wondered, why didn't Barry just try to act differently in that moment? He knows that begging Savitar does nothing, so why not act differently, or run away, or start running to save Iris earlier? Also, Savitar is moving at normal speed when he stabs Iris, so there is literally no reason that Barry shouldn't be fast enough to save her. Anyways, leaving on the cliffhanger that Barry and the team failed to change the future, episode 23 starts off with the worst fake out ever. In episode 6, HR showcased a piece of technology that allowed himself to holographically change his appearance. Then, once Barry saw the future, everybody started predicting that HR would use that device to pretend to be Iris, and he would sacrifice himself. Sure enough, that's exactly what happens, and Iris lives. I think that it would have been a really bold choice if they actually did kill Iris, and to be completely honest, I think that they should have. After this season, they ruin Iris's character beyond belief, and the fake-out ending here doesn't feel earned. Throughout the season, Savitar says that Wells makes it through his wrath, but, of course, with dialogue that obvious, it's the first thing that everyone is going to expect. And if they didn't do the fake-out, I was expecting Barry to time travel to save her. Anyways, stupid fake-out death. HR deserved better. Also, this is kind of a nitpick, but whatever. In episode 6, HR changes his face with the device to look like his partner on Earth 19, and then gives all of Team Flash a retinal adjustment, so they still see him as Wells. Later in the season, the team meets Tracy Brand. She wasn't part of Team Flash when Wells gave them the retinal adjustment, so she would be seeing Randolph Morgan. In the finale, Harry comes back, and she immediately recognizes him as HR's doppelganger, despite the fact that she wouldn't have been seeing HR as Wells. Anyways, since Iris lives, Savitar now doesn't get created in the future. This is another writing flaw. Let me explain. In episode 21, Barry and Savitar have a conversation where Barry learns that in the future, he creates a time remnant that becomes Savitar. In response to this, Barry threatens to kill himself because,
If I die, then you'll never be created.
Savitar brushes this off, citing Eddie and Thawne as an example. Eddie killed himself, which means that Thawne doesn't exist, but because the timeline needs to remain intact, Thawne does still exist. Now, the thing is, if Barry does kill himself, it would mean that Savitar gets erased from existence. He would exist as a time remnant, but he would only exist until this point. his existence is limited. This is where his story would end. Anyways, point being, Savitar says that if Barry kills himself, it won't erase him. Fine. So tell me, if that doesn't erase Savitar, why does Iris living erase him? It's literally the exact same thing. If Barry dies, he doesn't witness Iris dying, and he isn't there to make the time remnants. That means Savitar literally wouldn't be able to exist. But apparently, that doesn't matter. If Iris lives, though, he gets erased. What? Anyways, due to this, Savitar is erased from existence. Wait, why isn't he gone yet? Iris is clearly alive, so why isn't he being erased from the timeline? They say that Savitar only has a few hours left to live before the paradox erases him. If that's the case, why didn't Thawne have a few hours before he got erased? The thing is, assuming that the show would have consistent writing, Savitar would have been erased from the timeline as soon as Barry learned that HR died, because if his existence was so dependent on Iris dying, just the fact that it was HR there means that he should be long gone. Another thing, in episode 14, Barry proposes to Iris. In episode 15, Wally gets Cisco to vibe him to the future to see Iris's death. When he does see the future, he sees that Iris doesn't have a ring on. Now, before I get into what happens next, I want to explain something first. In episode 9, Barry gets tossed to the future and he sees Iris's death. In episode 10, Cisco vibes himself and Barry back to that moment, and they discover that just by telling Team Flash, that moment has already changed. Now, HR was present on the roof of a building, pointing a rifle at Savitar. I bring this up because it's proof that the future can change, and that when it does, Cisco's vibes change with it. Point being, when Wally sees the future, he sees the latest version of it, which means that even with Barry's proposal, Iris still doesn't end up having a ring on in the moment. Now, this could be for multiple reasons. She could have dumped Barry. Barry could have dumped her. The ring could have gotten lost, or broken, or stolen, or anything. The fact that Iris doesn't have a ring on in that future does not mean that she didn't have it on originally. After Wally sees this, he immediately assumes that Barry only proposed to her to change the future, and he calls him out. Of course, Wally is right, and Iris dumps Barry. It's almost like when there are relationship issues, a fiancé might, I don't know, take off the ring? Wally gets mad at Barry for making an impulsive decision without telling anyone, and then he proceeds to do the exact same thing later in the same episode. It's very dumb. Wally was kinda annoying in that episode. Anyways, there are a lot more criticisms I can make about this season and its poor writing. I haven't even mentioned the stupid-ass musical episode they did, but...
I'm your super friend.
Oh god, we don't talk about that episode. Anyways, I'm mostly done talking about what happens during the season, but the last thing of note is that, after freeing Jay, the Speed Force becomes unstable and creates a storm in Central City. Barry ends up going into the Speed Force to stabilize it, and that's how it ends. Barry saves the city and leaves. That's the end of the season. Oh, by the way, Savitar's prison also doesn't make sense. In the future, Barry and the team stop Savitar by trapping him in the Speed Force. But then, how does the Time Remnant become Savitar and end up in the Speed Force? Let's break it down. This seems to be how the timeline plays out originally. Savitar shows up and eventually ends up killing Iris. He's too fast for Barry to stop, so Savitar ends up being a problem for years, up until 2020. Sometime during those years, Barry creates a bunch of time remnants to fight Savitar, and then one of those remnants lives and becomes Savitar. But, in 2020, Barry traps Savitar in the Speed Force. That's how he beats Savitar, and that's why when Barry travels to 2024, Savitar isn't a threat. Now, that means that the time remnant that becomes Savitar is still kicking around. How does that time remnant become Savitar? If the first time Savitar attacks, he's in the Speed Force. when does the Time Remnant end up in the Speed Force? If future Barry traps Savitar in the Speed Force, does that mean he traps the Time Remnant and defeats the original Savitar in a different way? The time loop is already bad logic. That just doesn't work, and this confuses me even more. Also, one last thing before I move on. In episode 15, when Wally gets pulled into the Speed Force, Barry literally just stands there and watches it happen. And then, Savitar starts to come out of the Speed Force, and Barry stands there and watches again. What are you waiting for, you dumbass? He could have tried something, anything. What if he just hit Savitar straight back into the Speed Force? It probably would have been possible to throw him back in and get Wally out. Anyways, that about wraps up my complaints with Season 3. The fandom of the show also began to get tired of the writing issues, the constant speedster villains, and the darkened tone. So, the show decided to take a new route with a non-speedster villain and a lighter tone. So, with Barry and the Speed Force, let's take a look at Season 4 and see if they were able to recover from the heap of waste that was Season 3. So, as I mentioned, Season 4 attempts to take a different approach. Being the first season without a speedster villain, I was wondering if the writing would be able to justify why Barry wouldn't just do this. Or why Wally wouldn't do this.
You're gonna want to hold on.
See ya.
Or why Cisco wouldn't just open a breach right under them. Yeah, this season's writing doesn't justify any of it. In fact, it doesn't justify any of what happens, because the threat could have and should have been nullified as soon as they learned about it. But we'll get back to that. Let's first start with the beginning of the season. With Barry gone, the first course of action is to have a fight scene to show how incompetent everyone on the team is. I know I said that I would only talk about bad fights with main villains, but upon rewatch, this fight blows my mind. We start with Wally running through the streets, until he stops. He calls out that he doesn't know where the meta is. Cisco jumps through a breach, clearly tired, and says that she has stepped up her game. Joe asks Iris where she is. The she they are referring to is Peekaboo, making her first appearance since Season 1. Anyways, Iris, being the only one at Star Labs, uses the satellites to track Peekaboo, and tells Cisco and Wally to duck. Due to the writers trying to make this season have a lighter tone, Wally thinks that Iris is pointing out a duck, and he says,
I don't see no duck.
before immediately getting hit by Peekaboo because she teleported behind them. 3 things. 1. Wally is a speedster. He should have lightning-fast reflexes. There's no reason that she should be able to teleport behind him and punch him without Wally reacting to it at all. 2. Wally is dumb. They're in a fight. Why would Iris be pointing out a random duck? I understand that they wanted to add comedy to the show, and I understand that this was meant to be funny, but comedy shouldn't be achieved by making the characters dumb. Anyways, 3. After Wally and Cisco each get hit, Cisco says,
Yeah, I cannot believe you actually thought she meant a duck.
if Cisco knew what she meant, why didn't he duck? Anyways, Iris figures out that Peekaboo is teleporting in a pattern of 3, so she's able to pinpoint where the next jump will be. She tells the team, and they each prepare to catch her. Cisco breaches up to the rooftop, and Wally continues chasing her. When she jumps to that rooftop, Cisco catches her midair and opens a breach. Wally then super speed tackles her into the breach, and Cisco follows. They all come tumbling out of the breach. Wait. I can understand why Wally and Peekaboo would fall out, but why would Cisco throw himself into the breach like that? He is willingly putting himself in a vulnerable position. Anyways, they fall out of the breach, and Peekaboo gets up. She manages to recover and stand up before a speedster does. How is Wally so incompetent? Now, Barry is equally as incompetent, but at least in the end, he is the one that catches the bad guys. Wally manages to be slow enough that a meta without super speed is able to get up and aim guns at them. And they just sit there while this happens. They act like this is a problem. Wally should be able to instantly grab the guns, or cuff her, or run her to prison. Cisco should be able to open a breach under her, but no, they do nothing, and Joe arrives to give her the boot. Okay, fight scene over. That will be my one exception. I'll go back to just pointing out main villain fight scenes now. Anyways, let's get to the character assassination of Iris. Iris West, the journalist, the reporter, has now become the leader of Team Flash, despite the fact that Barry told Cisco that he was the leader of Team Flash when he left for the Speed Force. Cisco even mentions this when he goes behind her back to try to save Barry. Cisco is the one with more experience on the team, having been a part of the team for 7 months longer than Iris. He also has more technical expertise, and he has powers. He is the obvious choice to lead the team. Iris, on the other hand, it makes sense that she would be at Star Labs during fights. It makes sense that she would be able to see the pattern of Peekaboo's teleports, because that's what she can do. She doesn't have powers, so she can stay back, she can analyze. What doesn't make sense is that she forces the team to go through hours of training exercises. She forces Wally to miss family dinner for a training program that will take him 4 hours. Barry and Iris both have a tendency to overwork the team, but Barry actually hasn't done that yet. Iris has, though. Anyways, after a robot samurai attacks the city and threatens to destroy it unless they bring him the Flash, Cisco reveals that he has been working on a way to bring Barry back. The team is skeptical, sure, seeing as last time they messed around with the Speed Force prison, multiple bad things happened. I can understand why they would be a bit hesitant to go along with Cisco. But Iris, oh boy, Iris is mad. Why? Well, because Cisco didn't tell her that he was trying to bring Barry back. But the thing is, Cisco's explanation was that he didn't want to say anything unless he was certain that it would work. Fair enough. Trying to bring Barry back comes with the risk of the Speed Force becoming unbalanced again. Besides, if it didn't work out, telling the team would just result in false hope. Should Cisco have looped them in? Probably. But I'm genuinely trying to understand what he did wrong in this situation, and I really can't see anything. Anyways, Iris has some questions. First she says,
Are you certain that the Speed Force won't take Wally in his place?
well, if the Speed Force wanted Wally, I'm pretty sure they would have said that in the Season 3 finale.
Are you certain that you can even close it before it rips Central City in two?
Speed Force portals have shown time and time again that they close nearly immediately after being used. There is no reason to believe that the portal wouldn't close. When Cisco eventually does open the Speed Force to try to get Barry back, the portal closes instantly. Besides, the Speed Force storm happened without a portal being open. Iris, are you stupid?
Are you certain that Barry is even still alive?
There have been 3 people that have gone into the Speed Force like that before. Hell, even when Barry died, he was able to be pulled out of the Speed Force in Season 2. You saw his ass get blown up, yet in the next episode, he was back and fully healthy. In Season 3, Savitar spent who knows how long in the Speed Force, and he still managed to survive. Wally got pulled into the Speed Force, he didn't die. Jay spent months in the Speed Force and he didn't die. Where is this assumption coming from? Jay, Wally, and Savitar each spent their time in a Speed Force hell while they were tortured with their worst memory. The Speed Force said that Barry wasn't going to hell. So again, where is this assumption coming from? Anyways, Cisco goes behind her back, recruits Caitlin to the team, and he decides to open the Speed Force without Iris's permission. This is where he brings up the fact that Barry promoted him to team leader.
I also know Barry said everyone would look to me after he was gone. So look to me.
Anyways, the plan is to send something called the Quark Sphere into the Speed Force. It will replace Barry in the Speed Force, allowing him to leave and tricking the Speed Force into thinking that Barry is still there. Cisco's plan to bring Barry back fails. Kind of. It works in the sense that it frees Barry, but he ends up in another part of the city. I don't know why. Each time that a speedster has taken someone's place in the Speed Force, they never end up in a different part of the city. Wally gets pulled into the Speed Force, and when Savitar exits, he ends up in the same place where Wally got pulled in. Barry enters the Speed Force in Season 3, Episode 16, intending to take Wally's place. When Jay enters, Jay takes Wally's place, and Barry and Wally exit the Speed Force in Star Labs, where Barry entered. So, why does the Speed Force just randomly toss Barry out in another part of the city? This is the first episode of the season, and I already have written nearly 3 pages about it. I get that Cisco's plan failed, but the only indication that it failed is the computer saying system failure. For all intents and purposes, Cisco's plan absolutely worked, considering the fact that it freed Barry from the Speed Force. So why didn't it bring Barry back out at Ferris Air? Well, I know the reason. Plot. Bad writing, but still, plot. Anyways, Barry comes out of the Speed Force with a broken mind, but Iris puts herself into danger for no reason, and then Barry snaps out of it. He saves Iris from the danger she put herself in, and finds out that the samurai was a robot, and it welcomes him home. That's basically the end of the first episode. Now, let's get into the overall plot of the season. This season's big bad is Clifford DeVoe, or the Thinker. He calls himself the fastest mind alive. Good for you. Thinking means nothing when the main character has super speed. I will get to the dumbass fights later, but right now, I need to talk about how brain dead our main character is. At the end of episode 6, the team gets a lead about DeVoe, and they go to confront him, only to find out that he's a man in a wheelchair. I actually really like this ending. DeVoe seems completely innocent, although the audience already knows that he isn't. In episode 7, Barely completely latches onto the idea that DeVoe is behind everything, even when all of the evidence points to him being innocent. They can't find a trace of dark matter in DeVoe, and Barry tries so hard that DeVoe files a complaint at CCPD. Barry then hears the Samuroid head vibrate, and he finds a camera. He then immediately assumes that it's coming from DeVoe, and he breaks into their house. He breaks in, unmasked, allowing himself to get caught, and DeVoe files a restraining order on him, and he gets suspended from his job temporarily. Now, I cannot understate how stupid Barry is for doing this. He has access to masks, and he can vibrate his face. But the plot requires that he acts like an idiot because it needs to move forward. The entirety of Team Flash doesn't believe Barry when he says that DeVoe is a bad guy, even though Barry's intuition has proven to be 100% right in the past, and it will continue to be 100% right in the future. Barry didn't want to trust Jay in Season 2, and Jay turned out to be Zoom. I understand that the evidence didn't point to DeVoe, but this is the start of the team doubting Barry. It's literally the same thing with Jay. All the evidence pointed to Jay being a good guy, but what happened? Well, he was Zoom. I just wish that the team would trust his judgments a little bit more, considering that he is the team leader. Anyways, Barry ends up being right about DeVoe, and they have a confrontation. DeVoe says that Savitar, Zoom, and Thawne are nothing compared to him because he has the power of limitless thought. All three of those villains are way more threatening than DeVoe because DeVoe's only power is thinking. DeVoe is literally paralyzed. If Barry were to try anything, he is completely powerless to stop Barry from running his ass to the pipeline. Later in the episode, Iris says,
How do we stop someone who has super intelligence?
"Oh, I don't know. Maybe just run him to the pipeline. Instantly KO him with a super speed punch? He can think fast. That doesn't mean he has reaction time. Barry is faster than him in every way except thought."
Guys, it's gonna take all of us to stop him.
No, it won't. Barry can instantly relocate him. He has no use of his legs.
Looks like you found the guy behind the bus, Metis.
Yeah.
So, you want to suit up? Take him down?
Yes, do it.
No, now it's his move.
What? What? Barry. Barry. Barry? What is wrong with you? Why would you let him make a move first? You are opening yourself up for a variety of problems in the future. If you stop him now, the season is over. I'm having a brain aneurysm. I want to punch Barry for this dumb-ass decision. And I probably could, because he has the reaction time of a snail. Sorry, I got off topic. Okay, so, DeVoe is revealed as the main villain of the season. Great. I have a problem with his powers. DeVoe's powers are said to be that he has increased intellect. He says that he has a preparation for any strategy that Barry and his team comes up with. Fine. The way that the show actually presents this power is that he knows exactly what they're going to do. That shouldn't be how it works. I get that technically nothing should be able to surprise him, but that doesn't mean that nothing should work. I would have really liked to see a scene where DeVoe thought about what to do, or where he thought about what Barry and the team could be planning. He knows things that he shouldn't be able to know, just because he can think fast. It doesn't mean he knows everything, but they act as if he knows exactly what's going to happen, in every moment. It makes for boring fights, especially later in the season, but we'll get to that. In episode 9, DeVoe kidnaps Barry. Barry then vibrates and becomes invisible. DeVoe then releases Barry from his cage. I want more things like this. This is basic, but it shows that even though DeVoe is super smart, he can still make mistakes. He doesn't know everything. He can't prepare for everything. Also, in this episode, Cisco, Harry, and Ralph, I'll talk more about Ralph later, basically bully Caitlin out of Star Labs because of a really dumb inside joke about Killer Frost. This ends up getting her captured by Amunet Black. Holy shit, Amunet Black is easily the worst part of this season. Her acting is so bad, her writing is so bad, her character is almost entirely useless, and they could have fixed this in numerous ways. There's too much to talk about. I'm going to ignore Amunet Black because I don't have much to say. I personally just find her really annoying. Back to DeVoe. His plan is really dumb. He thinks that technology and emotions are the worst thing to ever plague the world, so he wants to do something called the Enlightenment. Basically, he wants to use dark matter to reset everyone's brains, and then he'll teach everyone how to act. Funny thing is, he got his powers due to technology. The particle accelerator? Technology. The thinking cap his wife built? Also technology. The satellites he wants to use to reset everyone's minds? Technology. For someone who hates tech, he sure uses a lot of it. Anyways, he orchestrated everything in order to get what he wanted. How? I'm not really sure. They just kinda say that. He was behind everything. Barry coming out of the Speed Force in the wrong place? DeVoe. The bus that Barry imbued with dark matter? DeVoe. He orchestrated the creation of 12 metas that would each have an ability that could help him achieve his goal. How can he be certain that his plan would work? How did he get the Speed Force to open in a random place in the city? How can he be certain that the dark matter would affect everyone in exactly the right way? Telling us that DeVoe is behind everything isn't an answer. It poses new questions, and these are questions that the show isn't going to answer, because the writers don't have an answer. Anyways, this busload of metas include Ralph Dibney, a dirty cop turned private investigator because he planted evidence in an investigation. Becky Sharp, someone who can manipulate luck to make herself really lucky, and everyone else really unlucky. And to be completely honest, I forgot the names of the others, but their powers include full control over technology, shrinking and growing items at will, gravitational manipulation, turning inanimate objects into living things, transferring meta abilities by touch, etc. DeVoe transfers his consciousness into each of these metas, taking their powers and getting new bodies throughout the season. In a season that is 23 episodes long, DeVoe looks like himself for 14 episodes. Sure, that is the majority, but that still leaves 9 episodes where he's shifting through bodies, which isn't counting episodes where he doesn't appear or isn't the main focus. None of the other actors are able to give a performance that is as good as the original actor. And that isn't to say that the other actors are bad, but they all try to imitate Neil Sandilands, and they can't nail it the same way that he did. Anyways, I don't want to spend too long shitting on the story of the season, so I'm going to break down the fights now. In episode 9, Barry and DeVoe end up flying through the city. Barry vibrates through one of DeVoe's attacks, which leads to his chair malfunctioning and throwing both him and Barry into a body of water. Barry watches DeVoe crash into the water. Eventually, we know that Barry is able to make it out of the water, so why didn't he check for DeVoe? Also, DeVoe is paralyzed, and he fell into the water with a broken chair. So how was he able to make it out alive? At the end of the episode, DeVoe frames Barry for his murder. Barry just decides to let himself get arrested for some reason. Also, in this episode, Barry says this.
Like your wife said, your brain may be smarter than mine, but your body, it's still human.
Yeah, you dumbass. That means that you are way more powerful than him. In episode 14, Barry and Ralph meet someone who can manipulate sound waves. Then, they try to bring her to Star Labs, and when they do, DeVoe attacks them. Ignoring the fact that Barry, Ralph, and Cisco all stand here to talk to DeVoe, although ignoring it is really hard because they're all brain dead, Barry can easily just run him to the pipeline. But he doesn't, and the Soundwave meta ends up attacking DeVoe. Good job, you did something that Barry was too dumb to do. Anyways, she attacks DeVoe, and he's on the ground right now. So Barry should use this opportunity and cuff him, run him to the pipeline, knock him out. Barry doesn't do any of these things, and DeVoe gets away. He then decides to train the new meta because he thinks that she is the best chance at stopping DeVoe. Barry, you absolute buffoon. You are the best chance at stopping DeVoe because he can't react at super speed. In episode 18, DeVoe gathers all of the bus meta's powers. From this episode onwards, he uses the gravitational manipulation to stop Barry from moving. This means that every time there is a fight, DeVoe makes Barry lay down on the floor and do absolutely nothing. What a great power. In episode 18, Harry makes a sonic weapon that can stop DeVoe. Again, ignoring the fact that Barry can just run him into the pipeline, this is great. I hope they actually use it and stop DeVoe. Yes, good job, Ralph. This also goes to show that Barry is just brain dead. Ralph doesn't have super speed, and yet he's able to stop DeVoe. But because of plot, DeVoe escapes and takes over Ralph's body. This is the first time that DeVoe uses gravitational manipulation on Barry. He forces Barry to lay there and watch as Ralph dies. DeVoe, buddy, you didn't actually need to do this. Given Barry's track record, he would have just stood there anyway. After Ralph dies, Barry phases through the ground and prepares to use the sonic device, but DeVoe hits him away. Barry runs in at super speed, and then stops and moves at normal speed to use the weapon. Why? In the next episode, Barry actually does use his speed to use the weapon against DeVoe. Of course, the weapon is useless now because of Ralph's powers. Barry sees this, and then stands there and lets DeVoe talk. Again, run his ass to the pipeline, please. DeVoe then uses Ralph's voice to troll Barry, and Barry has a PTSD response and completely freezes up. In episode 20, they have a fight that is almost really good. They start with Barry's speed hitting DeVoe. Nice. He's on the floor. Knock him out, cuff him, or bring him to the pipeline. Barry kind of just stops in front of him. What are you doing? Iris then tells Barry to knock him out and cuff him. Okay, good. Stay on task. Barry then starts running around to prepare a lightning bolt. Okay? You could have just speed punched him, but it's fine. Barry actually throws the lightning bolt and it hits DeVoe, so that's fine. Gypsy then uses a blast to stun DeVoe. Awesome. Now cuff him. Or run him to the pipeline. Hit him in the face and knock him out. Hit him with another lightning bolt, for crying out loud. Oh my god. You guys are actually useless. Cisco gets attacked by DeVoe's wife. Gypsy stops attacking DeVoe to hit her. Barry is standing there doing nothing. Barry could have hit DeVoe while he was down. Barry could have taken care of the wife while Gypsy was hitting DeVoe. But no, Barry is dumb, Gypsy turned her back on DeVoe, and they let him escape. Caitlin comes in and freezes DeVoe. He breaks out and uses the gravitational manipulation to freeze Caitlin and Gypsy. Barry then gets up at normal speed and allows DeVoe to once again freeze him onto the ground. Barry, you dumbass. Anyways, DeVoe monologues a little bit and tells Barry and Caitlin that Gypsy doesn't matter to his plans, so he lifts her up and begins to choke her to death. Barry is in the room. He can see that this is happening. Iris goes over comms to say,
Barry, he's gonna kill Gypsy.
"No shit, Sherlock. Barry can see that. He has these two things on his face. They're called eyes." In episode 22, Barry destroys a satellite to stop DeVoe from using it for the Enlightenment. Barry then stands there and talks to DeVoe as if he has 100% stopped his plan. Barry has clearly forgotten the fact that DeVoe can use any other satellite. Dumbass. DeVoe goes on to do exactly that. Barry then goes into DeVoe's mind in the finale. He tries to salvage the good in DeVoe, but it doesn't work. He then finds Ralph and ends up bringing him back to life. In this episode, Barry and Ralph have one last fight with DeVoe. In this fight, DeVoe uses literally none of his powers, and Barry just runs right past him and his many clones. It was this simple the whole time. I'm having a stroke. Also, in episode 18, Barry and the team try so hard to get Ralph not to kill DeVoe, but in this episode, they kill DeVoe to bring Ralph back. What is this writing? Anyways, DeVoe's last act is to send the Starlab satellite crashing down to Earth by increasing its gravitational pull. This is essentially an apocalypse-level event. It would be very useful if you had someone who could breach the satellite onto a dead Earth. Wait, Cisco? You gonna do anything? Cisco? Hello? No? Okay. Barry decides to supersonic punch it, and when he does, he gets help from a mysterious speedster that was teased throughout the season. That speedster is Nora West Allen, the daughter of Barry and Iris. I'll get to her next season. Anyways, Barry and Nora are able to destroy the satellite, and the day is saved. Although there's still debris from the satellite that can hurt people. And hurt people it does, but again, next season. Anyways, the season ends with Cecile giving birth to her and Joe's daughter. Cecile is also a metahuman. That's important later, but not very important this season. This season ends with Nora entering Joe's house and telling everyone that she's from the future and she made a big mistake. Dun dun dun. Anyways, I do want to talk about one last thing before we move on, and that is Ralph Dibny. I actually really like his character, and his intro episode is one of my favorites this season. There is a 5-minute sequence where Barry and Joe first go to ask Ralph if he was on the bus when Barry came out of the Speed Force, and that leads to them bringing Ralph to Star Labs. At first, we get to see his douchebag PI skills. He found a woman's boyfriend who ran away and got married and had twins. She starts crying, and he tries to cheer her up, and then he tries to ask her out. He then gets slapped in the face. The grunt scream thing that he lets out is pure comedy gold. It's also a great intro to his character. In one scene, you can see exactly how much of a douchebag he is, while also kind of trying to be a good person. But then, Barry and Joe walk in, and the tone changes. You can tell they have history. Tension fills the room, especially between Barry and Ralph. They ask if he was on the bus, and tell him that the bus driver had a card with an IOU on it, but that the driver died. Ralph makes a comment about having one less favor to pay back, but he doesn't answer anything about being on the bus. He tries to get information from them, but they don't give much. He lies about being on the bus, and Barry and Joe leave. After they leave, 2 men walk in and hang him off the side of the roof. As he's being held, his legs stretch and he safely lands on the ground. Barry and Joe walk by and see this, and they take him back to Star Labs. In Star Labs, Harry and Caitlin start to figure out what's happening to him and why he has these powers, and Ralph is hearing them discuss it and completely freaking out. He tells Barry to fix him, and Barry is immediately defensive and they begin yelling at each other. And then everyone starts yelling. Ralph ends up sneezing, and since he can't control his powers, his face stretches out, causing Joe to puke. Amazing. This is a good way to do the lighter tone, in my opinion. The comedy isn't formed by people being dumb. It's formed because of the character interactions that play really well off each other. And the best part is, it isn't filling every scene with a joke. When it needs to be serious, it is. Another great scene is when Joe and Barry find out that Ralph is blackmailing the mayor. Barry walks in the room and is upset and accuses Ralph immediately. And then they argue. It's a great scene. The writing is good. I really like the dynamic between Barry and Ralph, and going forward, I love that Barry and Ralph do get along, but Ralph is still sorta douchey, and Barry still gets annoyed and frustrated by Ralph's morals. All in all, I really like Ralph. He was a good addition to the show. With that, I have nothing left to talk about. Season 4 wasn't great, but I wouldn't necessarily call it bad. It's not good, but it's not terrible. That being said, let's get on to Season 5, because I have a lot to say. This season fucking sucks. It's so bad, there is almost nothing redeemable about it. Nearly every detail about this season is fucking cancer. They even ruined the mask of the suit. It ruins nearly everything it touches. And if you thought DeVoe was a weak threat against Barry, oh boy. Cicada, and Cicada 2, are both garbage villains who should have been caught 100 times over. The plot of this season revolves around Nora, who came back from the future to meet her dad, Barry. Nora starts off as a fun character. She's a bit childish and impulsive, but she is nice and fun, and she clearly wants to do the right thing and impress her dad. As the season goes on, however, she becomes a whiny bitch who puts herself in danger, fucks with the timeline on multiple occasions, and teams up with Barry's arch-nemesis, a choice that gets her dumb ass killed. This season is filled with lazy and inconsistent writing, and it further assassinates the characters beyond belief. Let's start with Nora, easily the worst addition to the show. In the first episode, she lies to the entire team about being stuck in the past, when in reality, she's there to meet her father. Now, that's an understandable motivation for time traveling. I can't blame her there. But the fact is that she continues to lie to them for another 17 episodes about Thawne, so not off to a great start. Barry and Iris have a conversation about Nora, where Barry, rightfully so, wants to send her back to the future as fast as possible. Iris thinks that future them would have taught Nora how to be careful when time traveling. Iris, clearly future you, is a dumbass. Did you forget about the fact that Nora just fucked with the timeline? During this season, Nora continuously ignores Barry's warnings to slow down, and she ends up getting injured multiple times, throwing Barry off when he's trying to stop metas, attacking Barry at one point because she doesn't listen to Iris and gets herself whammied, and actually attacking Barry again later in the season, but I'll get there later. For now, let's talk about Cicada. Holy shit, Cicada is a terrible villain, and there is just no redemption for either version of them. In episode 2, he's actually pretty cool. He shows up out of nowhere, stabs the meta of the week, and then kicks Barry, Ralph, and Cisco's asses with relative ease. This is because he has a dagger that can dampen meta abilities. After this episode, however, they introduced his ability to fly, and once they did that, it was all over. Every fight with Cicada after episode 2 ended because Cicada just flew away. In episode 3, Cisco and Cicada end up in a forest. Once the team figures out the location, Barry rushes in and ends up losing his speed immediately as he gets there. Nora is then able to show up and throw a lightning bolt, despite the fact that the dagger should be dampening her speed. Okay. If she still had her speed, why didn't she just cuff him? Why didn't Barry cuff him when he got hit? Anyways, they use an explosion to fake Cisco's death, and Cicada uses the dagger to create an energy shield. Sure, fine, whatever. He then starts bleeding and he flies away. Okay then. What confuses me is that after getting their asses handed to them twice, Team Flash never considers that they should learn how to fight without their powers. They're hopeless. The writers try to build tension and drama by saying that in the future where Nora comes from, they never caught Cicada. Of course they didn't. How do they catch any of the big bads when Barry and the team are genuine morons? In episode 8, Nora comes up with the idea to make a device to counteract Cicada's dagger. In order to do this, they would need to go back in time to collect a few items. It isn't a bad idea, and this episode was actually pretty good until the end. They get into another fight with Cicada. The dampener works, and Cisco breaches the dagger into space. Okay then, why not breach it to another Earth? Guarantee that Cicada can never get it back. Anyways, whatever. As long as Cicada doesn't get the dagger back, then it's fine. Barry uses his speed to punch Cicada a few times. Great, now put the meta cuffs on and take his ass to prison. But no, they're dumb. They tell Cicada the dagger is still in the universe. He calls it back and gets away. Again. In episode 11, he breaks Nora's back. She fully recovers in the same episode, and Barry nearly kills Cicada. Nora then speeds in and tells Barry to stop. Barry does stop, and just walks away from Cicada. And then, Cicada, again, just fucking flies away. I'm sorry. What? In episode 14, Nora resets the timeline 52 times in order to save the team from Cicada. When doing this, they end up in a timeline where Cicada gets stabbed with his own dagger. Once he is stabbed, Nora, Iris, Cisco, Frost, and Ralph all stand there while Cicada is on the floor. They don't cuff him or knock him out or anything. They stand there and watch. And then guess what? He flies away. In episode 16, Barry tries to convince Cicada to take the metahuman cure. I'll cover that later. The first time, Barry fails and Cicada attacks him. Frost then breaches in and hits him with an ice blast. Cicada is then standing there for like 10 seconds, and Frost does nothing. Oh, look, he flies away. Surprise, surprise! Barry later does convince him to take the cure, and when he does, a second Cicada shows up. This one is the first one's niece. Now, she doesn't have the dampening dagger, so all of Team Flash can use their powers against her. So take a guess as to what they do. Do they, A, collectively overpower Cicada 2 and take her ass to the pipeline? Or B, fight like idiots and let her get access to the dampening dagger? If you chose A, haven't you learned by now that the show has no logic? When Cicada 2 shows up, Barry decides to throw a lightning bolt. What happens when he does that? Well, she blocks it and Barry gets hit by her energy blast, removing him from the fight. Barry could have speed punched her so many times. He could have instantly relocated her to the pipeline, or Iron Heights, or done fucking anything. But no, he tosses a lightning bolt, then gets hit by a meta without speed. Barry, I hate you so much. In episode 17, Barry and Nora try to protect the meta that accidentally killed Cicada 2's parents. When Cicada 2 attacks, Barry and Nora get hit, but the meta she's after is able to use her powers. Nora then gets up after she hits Cicada and says, Barry then says, Barry and Nora both take the meta and her family out of the building, leaving Cicada 2. I need to break down how dumb this scene is. First, Barry and Nora apparently don't have their speed. Alright, Cicada 2 did use the dagger earlier, but technically, she only created an energy blast. But whatever, Cicada energy blasts Barry and Nora into the ceiling. The meta then grabs a soccer ball and uses her powers. But she was directly hit with the dagger's energy blast. If Nora and Barry don't have their speed, how can the meta use her powers? The meta hits Cicada 2, and then Nora gets up and says that her speed's back. If the meta could use her powers, how are your powers just now returning? Shouldn't you have had them the whole time? Whatever. Barry and Nora get their powers back, and their first instinct is to get the meta out of the building? You have your powers! Knock Cicada 2 out! Cuff her! Bring her to prison, you absolute buffoons! In episode 21, Cicada 2 tries to detonate a bomb that is going to kill all metas. She puts the dagger into the bomb, meaning that she has no way to dampen anyone's powers. They knock her out almost immediately. Then Barry says this.
It won't keep her down long.
Barry, you dunce. Put her in meta cuffs. She's already knocked out. Just fucking fucking cuff her. Oh my god, I can't. Barry, Frost, Cisco, and Ralph are all there, and none of them think to cuff her? Oh my god, Central City is being protected by cretins. They knock her out twice. She wakes up and fights them again, but Barry uses his speed to knock her out. And what does he do? He leaves her there and goes to destroy the dagger. Fine, destroy the dagger, I don't care. But cuff Cicada, holy shit, you dimwit! At this point, their plan is to destroy the dagger, and in the finale, they act like it's their only choice. But in every single fight between the team and Cicada, they should have been able to catch her. Now, let's talk about Nora. I fucking hate Nora. In episode 1, she isn't that bad. In episode 2, she is overambitious and gets herself in trouble a lot. She gets caught by the meta of the week, but so does Barry, so I won't blame her too much. And she ends up hitting Barry with a lightning bolt. Nice. In episode 3, she does the same thing, being hot-headed and landing herself right in the middle of a trap. In episode 4, we get her reasoning for hating Iris. In the future, Iris puts a meta-dampening chip inside of her so that she would never know about her speed. I understand why Nora wouldn't like Iris for that. Hell, in this season, even I don't like Iris. Anyways, in the end, Barry and Nora go to stop the latest meta who can hypnotize people through her headlines. Nora gets whammied and she is convinced that she has to kill Barry. They then have this gem of a line of dialogue.
Nora, you gotta snap out of this.
What I have to do is kill you.
Wow, what atrocious writing. Also, Nora ends up flirting with the villain of the week instead of checking if she was a meta. She had one job. Ugh. In episode 5, Barry gets knocked out by a non-speedster meta because, of course he did, and Iris tosses herself off a building. At the start of the episode, Barry tries to stop a thief on a motorcycle. Nora then steps in and almost gets 2 innocent people killed because she ignored Iris and didn't listen to Barry. In the next episode, Nora has this gem of a line.
I just said I saw you jump off a building last week, and that was awesome. So I thought maybe I'd come with you while you did some detective work.
Kill me. In episode 7, Nora gets mad at Barry for almost dying when trying to save the city. Like mother, like daughter, I suppose. Again, I'll get there later. In episode 8, Nora blabs about their plan to Thawne in the past, like an idiot, setting Thawne up with a plan to escape prison, even though that doesn't make sense, but we'll get there. In episode 10, she lashes out at a meta because she believes that nobody can change, even though in episode 5 she went from hating Iris to thinking that she's the coolest person ever. In other words, the writers pulled forward her character development and then proceeded to pretend it never happened. Okay then. In episode 11, she distracts Barry and lets Cicada get away, again. In episode 12, she uses a machine by herself because she doesn't want Barry to see her memories, specifically that she is working with Thawne. In episode 13, Nora tries to distract Wells by trying to fix his marriage, and then introducing him to another doppelganger of his ex-wife, who he then falls in love with. She does this because Wells is investigating her, because he believes that she is working with someone, which she is. In episode 14, she fucks with the timeline again. In episode 17, Nora acts like a complete hypocrite. She was so mad at Iris for keeping her powers a secret, but now she says that keeping a secret to protect someone is noble and justified. It's funny how Nora was so mad when it happened to her, but when she needs to protect herself, it's completely fine. At the end of this episode, Nora actually does get exposed for working with Thawne, and it's one of, if not the best scene this season. The new Wells shows up and absolutely just fucking exposes her for working with Thawne, and exposes that it was Thawne's idea for her to punch the satellite at the end of season 4. The funniest thing is that they flash back to Wells discovering all of these facts, and they play the scenes in slow motion for literally no reason. It's hilarious. Anyways, Barry's immediate reaction is to throw her ass in the pipeline. Woo! Finally, Barry is making a good decision. Also, Barry doing this means that he is fast enough to relocate a speedster without them noticing. There is no excuse for anyone to surprise or hit Barry. In episode 18, you learn Nora's backstory and why she started working with Thawne. It's because she discovered a new speedster in Central City, and then she discovered her own speed. When she did, she tried to stop the speedster, but she couldn't, so she went to Thawne to learn how an evil speedster would think. The speedster in question is Godspeed. I have a lot to say about him, but he isn't a main villain until Season 7. For now, I'll just say this episode is not a good adaptation of Godspeed. They turn him into a Velocity 9 junkie who just wants speed. Whatever. At the start of the episode, the entirety of Team Flash get mad at Wells for literally no reason. Iris is mad that he exposed Nora, and then Joe asks how long he suspected that Nora was hiding something, and when he says that he was suspicious from the beginning, they get mad at him? Iris says,
So you've been following this trail all this time and you didn't think to tell us about it until now?
Bitch, he told you in episode 11 and you told him to drop it. You said that he was following the wrong trail by investigating her, but now that you know he was right, it's a problem? Oh my god. Anyways, at the end of the episode, Barry decides that Nora can't be trusted, and he sends her back to the future. Again, that is a fucking amazing decision. Let's go, Barry. 2 for 2. Then, the writers decided that the 2 good decisions Barry made were actually bad decisions. With one scene, they took a giant shit over all of Iris's characterization. This scene, and this scene alone, makes me hate Iris so much. Here's the deal. Iris is mad that Barry took Nora back to the future without consulting her. Alright, I can understand that. At the start of this argument, I would say that although Barry was 100% justified in taking Nora to the future, and I think that it was the right choice, Iris's feelings here are also 100% justified, and I'd go as far as saying that if she continues the argument with this mindset, she would be in the right.
You know, we have been through so much crap, we have been through so much therapy, and you are still making decisions based on your emotions.
I am all for Iris's argument when her point is that Barry should have talked to her first. I agree that, in the end, Barry should have done that, but his choice to send her back to the future was ultimately the right one, whether he talked to Iris or not. I will explain why when I'm done this entire scene. Anyways, Iris was 100% right until she said this.
Because I'm right this time!
Flashpoint? Going to the Speed Force and leaving me, were you right those times too?
Fucking what? Flashpoint? Sure, I can understand her point by bringing that up. He made that decision without talking to anyone and ended up screwing up everyone's lives. Fair point, but to be honest, nothing really warranted Iris bringing up Flashpoint. Barry said that he was justified in bringing Nora back to the future, but he never justified any other actions, just that in the current situation, he felt that he was right. But Flashpoint being brought up, that isn't the issue. No. The issue is Iris saying that Barry was wrong for going into the Speed Force. Excuse me, what? Iris, the city was getting shit on by a Speed Force storm. Barry didn't choose to do that without consulting you. Barry had to do that. He saved the city. He saved Joe, Wally, Jay, Harry, you. He saved everyone you know and love. How is that a choice that Barry made because of his emotions? And how is it the wrong choice? Iris, where is your brain? Do you even have one?
Damn it, Iris, she lied to us for months!
And she explained why!
That she was working with Dawn?
That doesn't bother you.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, Iris, your entire argument is officially invalid. Do you realize what you are saying? Thawne killed Barry's mom. Barry is your fucking husband. How can you look him in the eye and with a straight face tell him that you don't care that your daughter is working with a monster? A monster who, let me remind you, killed Barry's mom, bombed the entirety of Central City, created metahumans, devoted his life to torturing and killing Barry, killed Cisco threatened to kill Joe, killed your reporter friend, and is the man responsible for the death of Ronnie and Eddie, your ex-fiancé. Iris, after everything that this man has done to you and your friends and your family, how are you okay with Nora working with him? You are a terrible mother and a terrible wife.
Maybe if he killed your mother in front of you, you'd feel differently.
Thank you, Barry.
Maybe you feeling differently, Barry, is why we should have made this decision together.
Actually, no, you should have made the decision together because Nora is both of your responsibilities. Barry's feelings are completely justified, and honestly, she shouldn't even be in the present timeline. Fuck you, Iris.
Is it really so hard to understand why she would go to him?
Doesn't matter if I understand it. Thawne is manipulating her.
He's on death row.
Barry, how is he manipulating her?
Iris, clearly you've never heard of desperation. He's a condemned man. Why wouldn't he be manipulating her? Anyways, Barry calls her ass right out about her making this argument based on her emotions towards Nora. Since Iris was able to convince Nora to stop hating her, she didn't want Nora to leave. Now, let me explain exactly why Barry was 100% justified, and nearly 100% right in taking Nora back to the future. 1. Nora kept this secret from everyone for months, so the trust is immediately broken as soon as Nora gets exposed, especially because Nora didn't come out and say it herself. Also, before I hear anything about Nora being cut off by Wells, she had so many opportunities to tell Barry before Wells exposed her. There is absolutely no reason that it should have gotten to that point, other than the fact that Nora was trying to protect her own ass by keeping it a secret. 2. Nora was actively changing the timeline. She created Cicada by punching the satellite. She was messing with the timeline with each choice she made. Every second she spent in the past changes the timeline. And 3. Thawne is the one who is telling her what to do and when to do it. Wells made this perfectly clear. Nora initially was careful when time traveling. She never made any big changes, until Thawne told her to punch the satellite. Thawne very clearly had some sort of motive for changing the timeline. He literally wrote "the timeline is malleable" in Nora's journal. There is no reasonable way to prove that Thawne isn't trying to change the timeline. And if Thawne is trying to change the timeline, that means that he is likely going to try to change it for his benefit. All of those factors combined makes it very clear that Nora should not be allowed to stay in the past, and all of her actions could be leading towards whatever plan Thawne has in mind. But no, Barry is in the wrong. I hate this season so much. In the same episode as their argument, Iris decides to be a complete hypocrite and go to the future to bring Nora back to the past. Iris, how can you go from yelling at Barry for making emotional choices and then go and do the same fucking thing? Nora then ends up tapping into the negative speed force, and she becomes one of the villains in episode 20. This is kind of dumb though. Iris gets to the future and tries to convince Nora to come with her. She tells Nora to stay away from Thawne. Iris, fuck you. Anyways, Nora says that Thawne is helping her get home. Bitch, the past isn't your home. You should not be in the past. This is your home. And Iris, you shouldn't be taking her back either. Nora then ends up having an outburst because she spent her whole life wanting to meet Barry, only to end up being abandoned. She runs off and enters the negative speed force and goes back to the past. Okay, 2 things. 1, if she was so upset that Barry didn't love her anymore, why would she go back to the past? And 2, she was under the influence of the negative speed force. So, if being powered by negative thoughts, why would she want to go back to the past and stop a villain? She ends up stealing a mirror gun that is capable of destroying the dagger. By the end of episode 20, she is back on Team Flash and using the normal speed force again. They also end up ruining another character in the process of this. In episode 7, we're introduced to someone named Weather Witch. She is the daughter of Weather Wizard, Mark Martin. He was a total deadbeat dad, and so she wanted to kill him. She returns in episode 10, being broken out of prison, but Cecile used her powers to sense that she was genuinely guilty for the things that she did, and Nora was able to talk her out of committing any more crimes. In episode 20, however, it turns out whether Witch is a bad person, and she double-crossed Nora and then tried to kill Barry. Okay then. In episode 21, Nora goes behind everybody's backs to try to find Cicada, and almost dies in the process. The opening of the episode shows that Nora and Cicada 2's minds are connected. While going to save Wells and his girlfriend, Nora sees what Cicada is seeing, but Cicada also sees what Nora is seeing. After this, Barry and Iris end up benching Nora, and Nora is upset about it. But their reasoning is that they want to keep her safe. No, the reason should be that Nora is a liability. If Cicada can see through Nora, then she would know everything that the team is planning. Whatever. Nora is upset about it because she's a bitch, and then she goes behind their backs to use her mental connection to find Cicada. I hate her. In the finale, Barry straight up boots Cicada mercenary style. He shoots the dagger out of her hand, and she dies right after. Thawne then ends up escaping prison because of the dagger's destruction. There's a short fight where all of Team Flash absolutely kicks Thawne's ass, but then Nora gets erased from the timeline. Woohoo, she's finally dead! Although I really hate her character, it is still hard to watch her death, and the message she left. Barry and Iris' reactions are great, the acting is great, and it really hits close to home when you lose someone that you care about. In the end, Cisco ends up taking the metahuman cure. He feels like his powers get in the way of his life. It's a really dumb choice because Cisco is so fucking overpowered, but he ends up giving up his powers, which then sets everyone up for more struggles later. Whatever. It's a dumb choice, but I guess it's what Cisco felt was best. I want to touch on one more thing before I get to things that I liked. The writing is still downright horrendous when it comes to the dialogue. One of the main themes this season was legacy. Of course, we had that theme come into play with Nora, since she was Barry and Iris' legacy, their kid. That was also a theme with Cicada, how he was a parent, and how his kid became another Cicada. That was his legacy. But, around 12 episodes into the season, they started making this theme really apparent. Episode 12.
Death, failure, another broken family. This is the legacy I gave you.
Episode 16, Barry gives Cicada a speech about his legacy to try to convince him to take the Metacure. In episode 22, the team catches Thawne, and Nora starts vibrating her hand, and she says,
"It's not my father's legacy that's gonna disappear, Thawne. It's yours!"
Bruh, we get it. You don't need to spell out the theme every 2 seconds. Nora refuses to go into negative speed force to save her life. She says that it's making her like Thawne, and
I don't want that to be my legacy. This is all on me.
She also says that none of Team Flash can save her from the negative speed force. You dumbass moron. Do you remember this thing? You know, the device they used to take Barry's speed? What is stopping you from using it to take out the negative speed force? They would likely still have it in possession, considering the fact that it wasn't destroyed in the fight with Cicada back in episode 8, and if need be, you could just manipulate Season 1 Thawne to fix it again, just like you did in that episode. It's not that hard. Anyways, let me talk about the very few things that I liked about the season. I mostly like episodes 1 through 8. They aren't as bad, and Nora doesn't get on my nerves as much as she does later in the season. I really like the part in episode 1 where Barry, Wally, and Nora phase the plane. It's taken straight out of the comics, and it's a great sequence. Barry uses the speech that Thawne gave him in season 1. It's an awesome callback. Lastly, a lot of what they did with Thawne was really good. I like how he had a full thought-out plan. I like how they actually show how Thawne is able to manipulate the timeline to get what he wants, and the final battle is great. I love seeing the teamwork between Team Flash, and seeing them kick Thawne's ass was amazing. Episode 8 was the 100th episode of the show, so they had a time travel plot where we got to revisit a lot of the show's history, which was great. I also loved the scene where they revisit the particle accelerator. In general, when the show goes back to this moment, it's serious, but it focuses on one group or one person. All the flashbacks that are shown are to introduce you to a villain. But this time, they show pretty much everything, and they had a great piece of music. It's fully serious, and it shows just how destructive the accelerator was, and how many lives it changed. That being said, there's nothing else that I like. This season is fucking garbage, and I wish that I could say it's the worst season of the show. But we'll get there. Anyways, this season ends with a newspaper from 2024 that says Barry will vanish, changing from 2024 to 2019, indicating that whatever crisis caused Barry to vanish is coming a lot sooner than expected. That being said, this script is way too long to keep in one video, so I'll be releasing a part 2 soon. Please let me know in the comments what you thought about my points, because I'm really curious to know what you thought. If you enjoyed, leave a like and subscribe to this channel to watch the second part, and to get even more movie, game, and show reviews in the future. See you soon!